Hey, what's up, nerds? Paul Conti here with a little bit of an analysis of the Blades of Khorne. I'm going to start with the allegiance abilities, artifacts, etc. that we've got in the Blades of Khorne book. Um, and what better place to start than our allegiance ability? Blood for the Blood God is actually the name of the ability. So whenever a unit is wiped out, whether it be a single model or a unit of, I don't know, 30 or 40 clan rats, um, you get a blood tithe point. You can expend blood tithe points in any hero phase, including your opponent's. Very important to note for strategic use of the blood tithe. Anytime you use blood tithe points, it empties your pool back down to 0. Which is kind of important to note so that you can't kind of build these up and just kind of continually spam, uh, you know, uh, any of the low cost ones over and over again. Just quickly going through these, for 1 blood tithe point, you can activate a command ability. It does not have to be the command ability of your general. It can be any model in your army that has a command ability, and this is in addition to the use of any normal command ability of your general. For 2 tithe points, we can unbind a spell automatically. Anywhere on the board, there is no rolling, nothing. The spell just doesn't happen. For 3 points, we can move a unit as if it were the movement phase or charge as if it were the charge phase. That is incredibly strategically valuable. I've already used that one and love it. And opponents that are not familiar with the allegiance abilities and the blood tithe table are going to be really surprised when you suddenly charge them during their hero phase. Number 4, you roll a d3 and heal all of your Khorne units that many wounds. Very, very valuable if you're running an army with high wound count models. For 5 points, a Khorne unit that is already in close combat can pile in and attack. Again, just getting an extra set of attacks in, say, your opponent's hero phase is really super valuable. For 6, we can pick a unit anywhere on the battlefield and do D3 mortal wounds to it, and then an additional 1 mortal wound to any other unit within 8 inches of that unit. For 7, until your next hero phase, whenever one of your models is slain, it can first pile in and attack as if it were the combat phase and its turn to attack. So basically, it gives all of, like, your entire army the ability that your Blood Warriors have to pile in and attack when they die. And for the grand total of 8 blood tithe points, you can summon a Khorne demon unit. This might as well just say summon Bloodthirster, because that's what you're really going to want to do with this. I have not seen official confirmation of this yet, but presumably this is going to require points out of your summoning pool, so I don't expect this to happen ever in a competitive match play game. I would expect to see this happening a lot in narrative games where you are allowed to summon outside of a summoning pool, or in casual games where you don't have any restrictions on summoning, or you use different restrictions on summoning. So out of this, what do I think is going to get used most often? I can see entire builds being made around activating command abilities off your general. auto unbinding spells, that's probably going to be really common conditionally against certain armies that rely heavily on magic. The one unit moving or charging, I see myself using that all the time. In you know, in moments of strategic importance, whether it's to charge block something or to move units in the way, uh, various different things. Jump on objectives. Um, Healing all of your models D3 wounds, I think that's going to happen a little bit less frequently, but it's certainly going to be useful. And choosing one of your units to pile in an attack as if it were the combat phase, that is extremely powerful. Doing mortal wounds to a bunch of stuff is, for 6 tithe points, I feel like that is not nearly powerful enough. And 7 and 8, I just don't ever see myself using those ever. So I think what we're going to see a lot is blood tithe points being expended, almost every turn. Or, in every one of your own hero phases or your opponent's hero phase. At least once a battle round, I think we're going to be spending blood tithe points on one of these abilities, and which ones we use are going to depend on how we build our list and what the situation calls for. I could certainly see lists built entirely around just one blood tithe point over and over again, activating lots of command abilities and doing it in your opponent's turn, doing it in your turn, so that you're stacking. For example, if your opponent gets double turns, you can end up with 4 command abilities active at once. This is why I said, in my last video, that I think this makes Archaon less valuable, because the whole shtick of Archaon, not the whole shtick, but his command ability is to let all of your other guys use command abilities. And in a Khorne force, you have a lot of good leaders with good command abilities. And it's really hard to pick which one. I'm really glad they threw us a bone in our blood tithe table to let us activate more than one without paying the absurd amount of points it is to add Archaon to our list. I think it provides a nice balance too, where you can have a couple in there, because there's a lot of really good heroes that have strong abilities or are really strong in combat that don't have command abilities that you want to include in your list as well. So I think that provides some really nice balance, and it's a nice alternative to be able to have flexible command abilities without having to buy Archaon. So I think if it doesn't necessarily make Archaon worse, it makes Archaon less necessary to have a really powerful list. Anyhow, moving on from our allegiance ability, let's look at command traits. There are 3 different command trait trees. One for mortals, one for bloodbound, one for demons. The first 3 command traits on each of those 3 tables are the same. Our slaughterer, your general gets an additional tithe point every time he slays a hero or a monster. Unrivaled battle lust. Your general can charge at the end of your opponent's charge phase if they're within 12 inches of an enemy model. Kind of cool. Always nice to have those, off-turn movements and charges. Not sure I necessarily would want to do that with my general, but it's certainly possible. And Slaughterborn, rerolling failed hits in close combat. Mathematically, there's a lot better things you can do than rerolling failed hits in close combat, so I personally pretty much strike that one off the list as it being all that valuable whatsoever. Um, you'll notice too these three generic command traits that are on all three lists. I don't really think any of them are particularly good. You're going to be producing a lot of tithe points anyway. Arch Slaughterer only gives you extra tithe points if your general slays a hero or a monster. So that's maybe worth 1 or 2 tithe points per game. Not really that valuable. And being able to charge during your opponent's turn, really only good if you're building out a really heavy combat oriented general. Our Bloodbound command traits. So first we've got Mark of the Cannibal. Whenever your general slays a model in the combat phase, he heals a wound. That's okay. All right, so our second trait here is the Bloodsworn. Units within 8 inches of your general use his bravery for battle shock tests. Looking at the bigger picture of how this army operates, you're not going to be taking a lot of battle shock tests, and you don't mind stuff dying. So I don't really think this is that great. Really strong, though, Disciple of Khorne, +1 attack to all melee weapons except mounts for the bearer. And this, I believe, increases the attack's characteristic, which is a pretty important distinction, in which we'll see later. But getting +1 attack versus an increased attack's characteristic is a pretty big deal, pretty important. Our demon command traits, immense power, +1 damage on all melee weapons except mounts. Again, really powerful, increasing that damage characteristic. Probably the one that I would be going with if my general is a demon. How often is my general going to be demon? Almost never. We'll get into that eventually. Not in this particular video, but needless to say, our demon general options are not that good. So picking from this table at all is unlikely. Aspect of death, enemy battle shock tests within 8 inches of your general cause +1 to flee. This is actually an interesting one. If you put a lot of different things together that can potentially get a Khorne mark or already have a Khorne mark, you can actually kind of create a bravery bomb list and really make your opponent's battle shock tests extremely bad for them, with stacking a lot of debuffs on your opponent's bravery and increases to battle shock, fleeing, etc. And then devastating blow, any wound of 6+ inflicts mortal wounds equal to the damage characteristic of the weapon. Most demons do this already anyway, so I'm not sure who you would put this on. Anyway, and then our last set of command traits are for the mortals. Hungry for glory, reroll hits and wounds of 1 when attacking heroes and monsters. Oh my god, is that a crappy ability in light of all of the other things that you can potentially do. I don't know why you would ever pick that. Berserker Lord is a really interesting one, and there's some interesting combos out there. with doing this. Giving your general a 5-up ward save is extremely powerful. One of the combos that I've seen talked about is using the Gore Pilgrims Battalion and actually making your Blood Secretor your general so that you can give him the Berserker Lord trait, so that he has a natural 3-up save with a natural 5-up ward save, and then bubbles out his Portal of Skulls at least 30 inches. I mean, that's pretty crazy. Violent Urgency, rerolling failed charge units, or failed charges for Khorne units within 8 inches of your general. There's a lot of other charge buffing stuff, so I'm really not sure that that's like what we really need to be doing. I think Berserker Lord is likely to be the one that we're going to be going with. So in total, we have 24 artifacts available to us if we're playing a Khorne Allegiance. Starting with the Bloodbound artifacts, Skull Helm, enemy units in 8 inches are +1 to battle shock tests. We have seen this one before in the command traits. This is, one of the ways we can start stacking these abilities to run a bravery bomb list. Unfortunately, that's not very effective against certain armies, namely other demon armies, your Seraphon armies, general high bravery armies. I'm not sure how good of a strategy it is, but it's an interesting idea that it's something that we can potentially build around. Bloodforged armor, basically you ignore rend -1. That's pretty good. It's not like, I'm not like over the moon excited about it, but it's certainly something to consider. The Brazen Rune, 2-up ward save against damage from spells, and once per game, you can automatically unbind any spell. And this is one that is interesting to take, depending on the metagame that you're expecting, because what this is basically, among other things, this is like a hard counter to Sail, preventing him from throwing stuff across the board turn 1. So if you're expecting a lot of Sail-oriented lists in your metagame, this may be an artifact to take to be an effective counter to that. The piece where it's, just a ward save against it's damage from enemy spells. Like, no, the Brazen Rune is really just a Dispel Scroll. That's basically what it is. Blade of Endless Bloodshed. It attacks to attaches to one of the weapons of the bearer, and you get +1 blood tithe point for every model slain by that hero. That's potentially really interesting. The emphasis on model, because there's some combinations of things where you can come and get some really powerful fighty heroes, and if you just use them to hunt down packs of, clan rats, etc., of other weak battle line units that are just sort of there to fill slots, I mean, you can suddenly end up with a whole lot of blood tithe points from that. My favorite artifact in the whole book, Mark of the Destroyer, it doubles the attacks characteristic of all weapons of the bearer except mounts. And the downside is if it fails to slay an enemy model, the hero dies and is replaced with a Chaos Spawn. Rules-wise, I believe that Chaos Spawn is going to require points out of a summoning pool, so for all intents and purposes, your guy just dies. And then Talisman of Burning Blood, all units in 8 inches are +1 to run and charge. I mean, not that exciting. I mean, again, it's one of those things that you can stack it on the right things. Say if you throw this on a Bloodstoker, now all of your guys that are getting whipped with the Bloodstoker are +4 instead of +3 to run and charge. Plus other guys in a bubble get +1. Maybe. But looking at our other options, like Blade of Endless Bloodshed and Mark of the Destroyer are just so much better that they go with the flow of the army. Talisman of Burning Blood is sort of like an extra thing that I'm not really sure you would necessarily want to do. Our mortal artifacts, Heartseeker, one of your hero's weapons, can reroll failed wounds. Not that exciting. Collar of Khorne, the bearer can unbind like a wizard. There's so much anti-magic stuff in this army that I feel like that's really unnecessary. Blood Drinker, it attaches to one of the hero's weapons, and you heal a wound every time a model is slain in the combat phase with that weapon. The Gore Cleaver is actually pretty cool. It attaches to a weapon, it gets an additional Ren -1, and wounds of 6 or more convert to mortal wounds. It's slightly redundant in that, if you're increasing the Ren's characteristic, then you're probably already going to be doing more wounds that can't be saved. But it's just sort of a little bit win more to convert those 6s to mortal wounds. Crimson Plate, reroll saves of 1. I mean, that's not that good, but if we're looking at this from the perspective of comboing things, if we're going to be making that really defensive Bloodsecrator build with, making your Bloodsecrator your general and giving him a 5-up ward save, if you have another artifact in your list that you don't really know what to do with, also giving him reroll saves of 1 is not really a bad thing to do either. So that's a possibility. And something really worth noting here that I haven't mentioned already, there's a lot of good battalions available to the Blades of Khorne. A lot of them are inexpensive. A lot of them do not require a lot of units. So I think, running lists where you have, say, 2 to 3 battalions in your list, giving you, 3 to 4 artifacts is totally possible in a 2,000 point list. So, you might be in a position where you're like, okay, I've got 3 artifacts to work with. I've got 2 that I really want to do offensively, and I don't mind giving reroll saves of 1 to, my Bloodsecrator to preserve the Portal of Skulls a little bit more. The Blood Rune, another item that gives an extra tithe point every time the bearer slays an enemy hero. There's a lot of this. There's multiple things that give you extra tithe points for slaying heroes. You could conceivably build a list around the idea of your general being just a hero slayer and getting lots of tithe points for it. I just don't know if that's a worthwhile thing to go after. It's a build to explore, I think, on paper and maybe test out a couple of times. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a really competitive build. Could be fun, fluffy, and interesting, though. So we got 2 sets of artifacts for demons. First of our, I believe These are the demon artifacts. The King of Blades. It attaches to a weapon, and that weapon always hits heroes on a 2-up. That's pretty sweet. The Death Dealer makes one of your weapons +1 damage. Again, that adding attacks and damage are really good. So like mathematically, that's like the best buff that you can give someone with an artifact. So, or with anything in general, not just with an artifact. So, when you have an army like Khorne that so heavily has an emphasis on buffing attacks, buffing damage is actually really powerful because it has like a multiplier effect on all of those attack bonuses that you get. So the Death Dealer, although it's only attaching to one weapon and it's only +1 damage on one weapon, that's potentially, with all of the other stuff floating around, going to result in a lot of additional damage being put out by the hero that you choose to put that on. So that can be really strong. So Kartoth the Blood Hunter, it attaches to a weapon. Any heroes or monsters wounded by the weapon must attack after all other attacks resolved in the combat phase. Basically, if it hits anything, whatever it hits strikes last in that combat. Which, if we look at the basic strategy that most people go with when they are choosing combat activations, unless they have multiple units attacking one hero or monster, after that gets attacked, it's going to be in the back end of the combat phase for activation anyway. So I think this one is actually pretty useless unless you're dogpiling on a monster. This is just like so situationally specific that I can't see ever actually choosing this, unless your opponent's an idiot, and then it forces your opponent to play correctly, which is not like a thing that you want to do anyway. The Hellfire Blade attaches to a weapon. Wounds of 6 up do a mortal wound in addition to normal damage. So there's a lot of things that convert your wounds of 6s to mortal wounds. This one just lets you get an additional mortal wound for wounding on a 6 or more. That's pretty good. Harvester of Skulls, similar to the Death Dealer, really powerful, adds an attack to one of your weapons. It's one of the more generic things that you can pick, but it's pretty strong. Behemoth's Bane attaches to a weapon. It rerolls wound and damage rolls when attacking monsters. Again, if your opponent doesn't put any monsters on the table, this is literally useless. So in just re-rolling wound and damage rolls is just not that good. Not that good. So I can't really, like, it's a fluffy thing to do, but I can't see it being useful. So our demonic adornments, the Crimson Crown, all Khorne demons within 8 inches get an additional attack on a hit roll of a 6. That would include the bearer of the Crimson Crown, of course. And honestly, I would almost look at this like it's just doing it for itself. This is an interesting one. If I was going to be running a Demon Prince, this would probably be the artifact I would want to throw on him. Because the Demon Prince's natural ability is to get +1 to its attacks characteristics when it takes a Khorne mark. So I believe, if I am getting my rules correctly, and this isn't somehow falling through a loophole, that means that your Demon Prince will be getting extra attacks on 5s, plus any other Khorne demons that happen to be around him will be getting extra attacks on 6s as well. Really super powerful. Definitely one that you want to consider. If you happen to be running a demon hero, that's a really good one to pick. Armor of Scorn, 6-up ward save, 5-up ward against spells. Not that exciting. Like a 6-up ward save to me is just not that good. I feel like it needs to be at least a 5-up to be really valuable. Otherwise, it's just like occasionally you're getting rid of another wound, but it's not mathematically doing enough to really preserve your hero for all that much longer. Mark of the Blood Reaper. If the bearer inflicts 8 or more wounds in one combat phase, you gain a tithe point. If you have one hero doing 8 or more wounds in the combat phase, you don't need a tithe point. In fact, you're probably getting a tithe point for doing that many wounds. So it feels a little redundant. It feels a little unnecessary. Having one model, like a single model, do that many wounds in the combat phase feels like a pretty high hurdle to hit. There's a lot of other ways to gain tithe points in easier fashion. Collar of Khorne, unbind a spell as if he was a wizard. Again, so much anti-magic stuff that I'm not really sure that this is the thing that you want to be doing. Crimson Stone heals D3 wounds every time the bearer slays a hero. Like, do we really want that much hero-on-hero action? Is that really the time when you want to heal D3? And on our Blood Tithe table, don't we have an ability to heal our entire team D3? Again, I just feel like this is one that's really not that great, not that exciting. Mark of the Slayer, reroll hits of 1 for all Khorne units within 8 inches, and also reroll 1s to wound if the bearer charged. Rerolling 1s to hit and wound is like one of the worst buffs that you can give something. It has such a statistically insignificant increase in the number of successful rolls that it's like, why are we doing this? So not really a big fan of that one in general. Plus, I mean, Khorne is very offensive, and you don't really need those rerolls to begin with. I mean, there's so many other like attack buffs going out there that like rerolling hits and wounds of 1 seems really sad. In addition to that, we also have banners of Khorne, which can be pretty strong, that we can attach to any totem. Interestingly enough, in addition to your Bloodsecrator and your Exalted Hero with a battle standard, your oh, why am I blanking on what that unit is? The Chaos. No, it's not the Chaos Altar. The other thing that's also a priest too is also a totem. In any case, which is interesting because it's going to be floating around the battlefield, but I don't think that's something that you're actually going to be taking in a Khorne army because the Khorne ability isn't that strong. Anyway, Banner of Rage, reroll hits of 1 in the combat phase. If they already have reroll hits of 1, then you can reroll all hits, but only within 8 inches of the bearer. Banner of Wrath, on a 4-up, it does D3 mortal wounds to enemy units within 8 inches of your banner. Banner of Blood lets you reroll charges for units within 8 inches of it. I feel like the Banner of Blood's the strong one. All things considered, if you're going to be taking artifacts, you're probably not going to be taking any of these. Um, you're probably going to be dropping your Blood Secretor back in your starting zone, and you're not going to be doing any of these things that often. So, and you're probably not going to be running any of the other totems that this can go on. Anywho, Blood Blessings of Khorne. These are the additional prayers that we can give to our priests. All of these go off on a 4-up. And if you roll a 1, it does a mortal wound to the priest. Just like the standard abilities on your slaughter priests. Bronze Flesh, basically just a Mystic Shield. Not a bad thing to have. Not sure that is the blessing that I would pick. Depending on what exactly I'm doing with my army. Blood Sacrifice. I actually really love this one for a variety of reasons. It does D3 mortal wounds to one of your units within 3 inches of your priest, and you gain a tithe point. This is really fun to combo with Scarbrand. Scarbrand gets better as he takes damage because he just gets angrier. So you follow your Scarbrand around with a Slaughter Priest. You whack Scarbrand, power him up, and gain tithe points to power up the rest of your army. Seems pretty good. Resanguination, all models within 16 inches heal D3 wounds. Or I'm sorry, not all. A model within 16 inches heals D3 wounds. We have a tithe ability that heals D3 wounds to the whole board, so I'm really not sure why we would be using that. Brazen Fury, a unit in 16 inches is immune to battle shock. Again, I feel like getting things immune to battle shock is really not that big of a deal in this particular force, which we'll explore further, in future videos. Killing Frenzy, a unit in 16 inches gets +1 to hit. Hell yeah, I want this. Especially in conjunction with that demon artifact that we talked about a minute ago that produces extra attacks on hits of 6. This pushes it to 5s for one of those units. So really good if it's on a Khorne Demon Prince. Now he's producing extra attacks on 4s, which is bonkers. And this is just, it's nice to have this ability because getting +1 to hit is just a thing that Khorne doesn't really do. Like, generally, you're just increasing the number of attacks that you have. So increasing the accuracy of your attacks, being a rare thing, is a nice thing to throw into your army and have available to you. And when you already have an absurd number of extra attacks floating around, getting +1 to hit on all of those attacks is really statistically significant in how much extra damage you're going to be putting out with them. It basically +1 to hit gets better the more attacks you throw. And then the Mega Bane Hex, the priest can attempt to unbind 1 additional spell. So he's got to successfully cast a prayer in order to unbind an additional spell, which he can already unbind 1 spell per turn. Why would you ever take this? Especially with the sheer amount of other anti-magic stuff in Khorne in general. There's no reason to do this, I don't think. I think you're going to be using Bronzed Flesh a lot. you're going to maybe be using Blood Sacrifice depending on your army build. You're going to be using Killing Frenzy a lot. And maybe Resanguination, depending on what your build is, depending on how many Slaughter Priests you're running. I see it much more likely. Also, these things, because they are prayers, they are not subject to the rule of one. So if you have 2 Slaughter Priests, you can throw out 2 Killing Frenzies throw out Killing Frenzy on both of them. So then, your Khorne Demon Prince can then, if you get off 2 Killing Frenzies on him, he's producing extra attacks on 3s, which is pretty ridiculous. He's like hitting on 2s, producing extra attacks on 3s. So he's like, mathematically, that's coming pretty close to just doubling his attacks. Anyway, combos. I think my math is actually incorrect in this first item, but using the Disciple of Khorne and Mark of the Destroyer on your Aspiring Deathbringer, plus having a Blood Secretor in range, I don't think it's actually 24 attacks. It's an absurd number of attacks still. An Aspiring Deathbringer has base 6. Disciple of Khorne gives him +1 to his attacks characteristic on each of those weapons. So that would be doubled by Mark of the Destroyer. So I think we're looking at, so it's 6 plus 2 is 8 times 2 is 16 plus 2 for the Aspiring Deathbringer's ability, plus 2 for the Blood Secretor. So I think we're looking at 20, not 24. Still pretty ridiculous on an 80-point model. Immense Power, Crimson Crown, and Killing Frenzy. You're getting extra attacks on 5-ups. And we already talked about doing crazy things with the Demon Prince with this. Immense Power plus Harvester of Skulls. That's just a really heavy offensive general. Berserker of Lord, Crimson Plate in Bronze Flesh. You're just going to have a really super tanky general. And of course, as we mentioned before, Blood Sacrifice and Scarbrand, just powering up your Scarbrand and getting extra tithe points for the fun of it, just to go along with that. Yeah, a lot of really powerful things that we can do here. There's a lot of room for different sorts of builds. What I really like about what the abilities in this book do is that it takes what Khorne already does and makes them just do it better. It doesn't fill in the gaps of the Khorne army and say, oh, Khorne can't shoot. Well, here's a bunch of stuff that gives Khorne shooting abilities. Or, lets you just tack on some other faction that can shoot for Khorne. Khorne hates magic. All of these abilities really, really, really hate magic. You can put a build together that just completely denies your opponent ever having a magic phase. Depending on your metagame, that could be a really powerful thing to do. Like if there's a lot of Tzeentch running around, if there's a lot of Sylvaneth running around, you could be really turning the tide of a game by shutting down your opponent's magic as powerfully as Khorne can. We have a lot of things that really lean into the kind of fluffy nature of Khorne, where you have everybody is just they're trying to get individual glory for themselves in the eyes of the Blood God, and holy crap, these artifacts in general are really slanted towards making some really combat heavy leaders and heroes in your army that are, you know, take an 80-point model and turn them into a crazy killing machine, or a 100-point model, or in the case of like a demon prince, he's already kind of, your elite um, ascendant demon, and throwing an artifact on him plus the other abilities that in the army that can stack on him, he suddenly gets to be crazy powerful in terms of being an offensive unit. So, and all for 140 points, which is pretty reasonable. Anyway, that's all I got for now. Feel free to drop some combos, thoughts, ideas in the comments below. Anything that I might have missed, any rules questions that you might have, any rules things that I got wrong, because I'm still new to this too, and some of the rules for this are potentially a little bit confusing. So one of my quests with this is actually getting all of the rules correct for this army, because some of the wordings are weird and some of the things that stuff can do are kind of funky and kind of are skirting around the gray areas of the rule book. Anywho, that's all I got for now. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. I'll talk to you all later.